KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother Dagan Moriarty. Dagan, I don't have any more nicknames for you with Game of Thrones. We've been doing this for so long, I don't even know where to go at this point. I feel like I live in this world. And so why would I name you something? We're just characters here.
It's been quite a journey.
Yes. How are you, my friend?
About Dagan Bend the Knee, Moriarty.
Oh my God. Did I go? I don't think I actually. Oh, did I say it in how much I hate that term? Okay, good.
You did. We went over it briefly. It wasn't,
As far as I can tell, because I've only read I'm on the second book now. In the first book, they use that term twice.
Oh, they do use it.
So it is there, but it might be more, but that's what I remember seeing.
So it is a George Martin thing.
Yes.
Definitely. I was curious about that. I'm glad we established
But you know that it's one of those things where they heard it in the writer's room and then there was like, let's just continuously say this. I would love to see the Google search term. You know, I love looking at that, like when Google search terms and like usage of words and all this.
Yeah.
I bet you it spikes like crazy.
Oh, it's got to. Yeah, they drilled it right into the ground.
Yeah, people might like saying it in like different contexts. I'm like, shut up. All right. Wow, I'm kind of uppity right now.
Kind of salty already to start the show. All right, well.
Didn't necessarily anticipate that, but Dagan, how is your life? How's everything going in your world, my friend?
Everything's good. I was thinking about, you and I had briefly touched on Too Many Games, the retro gaming convention out here in the greater Philadelphia area. Took place last weekend, and I got to see Dustin of Last Stand Media fame and our friend Ben, our friend Dustin and our friend Ben and others. Some fans of the shows came out for a little meet and greet. It was a good time. But I was just thinking about the state of retro game collecting in general, specifically NES game collecting, which I kind of fall in and out of. You know, I ebb and flow with it, peaks and valleys, but I've been into it again lately. And I'll tell you what what kind of stimulated it this time around was I ran into this game randomly on eBay called Starship Hector, a Hudson Soft game. Oh, I actually have it here. Okay.
Okay, cool. Very nice.
And that's the cool thing about collecting for NES specifically. There's 716 licensed games, a lot of titles. So sometimes, even though you think, all right, I think I know of everything. I don't own everything, but I think I know of everything. A game will pop up and you're like, wow, that game has never been on my radar. So I saw it and it had this cool box art with this 70s/80s anime, sort of this Tetsuo Hara, Kenshiro, Fist of the North Star style artwork. So I was in. And then I did a little bit of a YouTube search and saw some Let's Plays. It's a space shoot 'em up, like Gradius, Life Force, Xanax, so on. So I get the game, and I never like to just get a game and put it on my shelf. Let me try it out. I'm feeling nostalgic. At night, glow of the TV, right? Popping into the NES. Dude, this game is fucking impossible. How have I never heard of this game? This game should be renowned just for its difficulty.
Let me look it up. What is it called?
It's called Starship Hector, and it's a Hudson Soft game as well.
I feel like I would have known about this.
Maybe some quality. You think you would know of it, right? Hudson B. But dude, this game, there's no way I'm getting off the first level. There's just no way. And you know what else? For those of you who are familiar with old NES and SNES era 8 and 16-bit shooters, a cool thing about this one is that you have a life bar. It's not just one or two hits to be destroyed. Still, absolutely impossible.
Yeah, I know Star Soldier because I'm reading now. It's a sequel to that. I know that game.
Oh, it's a see, I didn't even know that.
And it looks awesome. I'm watching it now.
Really,
yeah, there's a little health bar.
Bad.
It's like a Castlevania style health bar on the bottom left corner with the little. This looks great.
Which is kind of novel for a space shooter. Right?
Yeah, I've never seen this game.
And you would think, oh, it's probably pretty forgiving. Maybe I could ratchet it up to a different difficulty level once I get good enough. No, you're jumping right into this thing. And So it's just like those NES feels just keep coming. You hear of games you never heard of before. You could still purchase them, pretty reasonable price, pop it in, play it. And, it just got me thinking, like, back in this era, you just don't know if the difficulty was intentional or if these guys were still just learning to develop, or maybe a little bit of both. Whereas did they intentionally make it this hard? Because let's face it, once they get your 50, 60 bills, right, at the store, it doesn't really matter. They got you. You already bought it. It's home. The only caveat to that was the rental bit, right? You could rent a game, try it out for $3, have it for a couple of nights. But yeah, dude, it kind of rekindled all those NES feelings, good and bad. So I thought it was kind of interesting. I thought it was really funny. And now I'm looking kind of for the next fix. It's like, what other NES games did I either forget about or possibly never even heard about? Like this one, somehow it just escaped me completely, that I could kind of investigate. There's something cool about discovering something that's 30, 35 years old, So now it's got me down on this, because I meander. I go from NES, SNES. I like to collect for the Japanese retro consoles, maybe TurboGrafx 16. I kind of come in and out of that. I get excited for different things. Maybe even a contemporary game. Now that we're seeing so much of the Cuphead DLC, I'm getting excited for that, for instance.
Yeah, it's out.
It's out now, right?
Yeah, it's out.
So, I don't know if I'm.
Yeah, I was looking at some videos. There's some
hole.
cool ass new enemies.
Dude, it's so beautiful. Oh,
I don't know what took them so long, but
it took a long time.
Too long. I think it's going to hurt them that it took too long.
I watched them announce that in 2018.
Yeah, I don't know what happened because they were always a remote studio, I think. So I don't know that you can really blame the scenario over the last 2 years on that. I think they just wanted to get it right, but I think that's a bit of a mistake on their part. But I'm looking at the Starship Hector ending, by the way.
Oh, no.
It's just one screen, and it says, "Be praised with your courage," and so on. The Earth is saved. And then it says, "You go on the long voyage. Good luck." And that's the end. That's the ending.
You love a good ending when we were those rare times we were treated to a good NES ending. But now I feel like those sort of English, one screen, really not typical, not a acceptable payoff for the brutality. I feel like that's kind of part of the journey now. Something you look forward to. It's like, wow, how bad is this going to be?
And by the way, the programmer of the game is named Hector Oyama. So Starship Hector.
Oh, named after Hudson Soft Hector. Look at
Hudson
you,
Soft Hector.
Friend.
Yeah,
I hope he's still out there.
Be praised with your courage, and so on.
And so on.
Good writing.
Really.
All right.
There's no error to replay. Now, what about you, my friend? I've gone on long enough. What's going on with you? What's going on in your world?
Not much. I've really just been reconnecting with Wild Arms the last little while.
Talk about retro.
One of our favorite games, and PS1 1997 Western Japanese release from Mediavision, the developer, and Sony published, second party game. And I don't know, man, it's just so good. It really, really, really is. It's so charming and so good. It's a turn-based role-playing game, heavily inspired, you can tell, by Final Fantasy VI and a few others. They have like a rune system instead of like an Esper system where you can summon monsters, and you my favorite part is the crest. I don't know if you remember crest glyphs, like where you take you like make your own spells.
Oh,
and
I forgot about
you like
that.
go into this like XY axis thing, and you match them up, and you try to like create spells, and you name them. And
so cool.
But what I love about it, and what I've said I love about it the most, is that it's just 3 characters. And though I love the ensemble role-playing games a la Final Fantasy IV and especially Final Fantasy VI, where there's just an extensive, I mean, it's just like I don't want to, can I spoil the last fight in Final Fantasy VI? It's been 30 years. You fight in Final Fantasy VI's last fight, your whole party fights against Kefka, like in phases.
So
like it's so cool. So it all comes together. And of course, your ensemble of characters in that game is depending on who you save after the world ends, which is,
right.
You've had 30 years. It's time for you to play Final Fantasy VI.
Get in there already.
It's even older than Wild Arms. But Wild Arms, I really love how they're just like, just 3 characters. Because there is this push and pull. I don't know what the perfect party is. I think our game that we're working on has 8 playable characters. It might be 7. with four at a time.
That's a nice
in
amount,
your
I
party.
think.
Yeah, and I think it's like, so it reminds me a little bit of Tales of Destiny, where you can kind of have like one full party out, one full party in, and then swap them in. That's like enough characters.
Yeah.
But there's something really special about saying, no. Like, you're not even going to have a General Leo type or a Bannon type join your party randomly and then leave. It's literally just going to be these three characters the entire time.
Yeah.
And you really get to know them. And I must say, the writing's a little weird because it's very fast, but the translation and localization's really solid. I'd be interested to know who did that. And I haven't played the game since college at all. That was like one of my last FAQs at GameFAQs. And I don't think I ever even finished it.
Holy shit.
But I really, really love Wild Arms. And people have been messaging me because it's obviously relevant right now because PlayStation Plus has two new tiers now. It's a 3-tier system. PlayStation Plus, for time immemorial, one of our favorite sayings, was just a 1-tier thing. But then in June, they split it into 3 parts. And I'm at the lower part, which is just like cloud saving and like a couple free games a month. I don't care about any of that other shit. Okay. I really just want cloud saving. That's all I want.
Right.
Also known as clown saving. And then there are higher tiers that give you access to PS3 and PS4 games, and then a higher tier that gives you access to PS1 and PS2 games, ported, and PSP games, which is really interesting.
That's huge.
And Wild Arms is one of those games, and Wild Arms is one of the games that has trophies, so people are really going in and playing it for the first time and finally taking my advice and playing it. And so that's why it's relevant to talk about this old MediaVision role-playing game. And we actually just did on Sacred Symbols an episode where we talked a great deal about is Sony courting Square Enix, because it really does seem like Sony is going to buy Square Enix. I don't know that that's necessarily true or not, but you have to think about like their AAA games or PlayStation exclusives, Final Fantasy 16, Final Fantasy 7 Remake 2, and so on and so forth.
Right.
And Dragon Quest 11, or no, is it Dragon Quest 12 now, is a PS5 game, and so on and so forth. Some of them coming to other consoles, Nintendo obviously getting supported and getting their own exclusives as well. So it's a little muddied, a little nebulous. But what came up to me, and I'm just going on and on, but what came up to me is that you don't need to buy them because you shouldn't want to buy them anyway. I think it's weird. I hate this this conglomeration shit going on. Everyone's combining with each other.
Could be dangerous.
But Sony owns great role-playing game IP. Why don't you just revive them? You own Wild Arms, you own Legend of Legaia, you own Legend of Dragoon, you own Dark Cloud, you own Rogue Galaxy, you own all of this shit.
Sure.
You don't need to buy them,
Sure.
So I'm hoping that the exposure with PS1 and PS2, but especially the PS1 games that are going to be coming in hopefully the months and years to come, Breath of Fire 3, Final Fantasy Tactics, Vagrant Story, Xenogears, Brave Fencer Musashi, as these games start to come out, I think there's going to be a look of being like, oh, we should really be making one of these. And Star Ocean is coming back this fall even. So
wow, I didn't know that.
So it's just really, it's time. Saga Frontier has gotten republished, which I don't like those games, but Seiken Densetsu and the Mana games, and there's just a lot. And I know Square Enix owns those, a lot of them, but you don't need to own them. Dude, everyone loves Dark Cloud. Remember Dark Cloud on PS2?
Of course.
People loved that game.
That's a classic.
People have been asking for Legend of Dragoon, which they were going to do a sequel, but they've been asking for it. Shuhei Yoshida produced that game. They've been asking for 20 years. You have your own shit. So in playing Wild Arms, we look at PS1 as this what I look at it as this console with an amazing JRPG heritage. I think it absolutely squashes SNES. I love SNES and I love the RPGs on there, but we're talking about 8 or 10 and we're talking on PS1 like 25 or 30.
Yeah, probably triple.
Like really excellent, including Wild Arms, the sequel.
Yeah.
So it just got my mind like, man, I hope Sony goes back to the well. One, they're made fun of, they call them like dad simulators and shit, right? We have our sad dad and we have our child and we have, and I totally get it. And obviously they're dominant in third-person storytelling games. No one touches them with those games.
Yes.
But there are other games, and it's maybe time for you to go back and explore those. Remember, they used to make The Getaway, which was an awesome Grand Theft Auto-like game. They used to make Colony Wars, which was a space shooter. They made games like Tokyo Jungle that were about like animals in a post-apocalypse. They made all this shit. And now it really is just like, oh, The Last of Us and God of War and Horizon. And I love those games, but come on, let's get into the nitty-gritty again.
Absolutely.
And I'm pretty sure MediaVision still exists, so let's get that Wild Arms going.
Does it? I was going to ask you about that. Or they defunct?
Pretty sure. I mean, Wild Arms. So I'm looking it up now, but Wild Arms got a remake on PSP, which I remember. It was called Yeah, Wild Arms XF, which I actually never played.
Okay.
The last game they're still around. They made Valkyria Chronicles 4 for Sega.
Oh shit.
Which is a strategy role-playing game in 2018. That was the last game they made.
Okay, not too long.
We haven't heard from them since, but they did Wild Arms and Chaos Rings, which was I don't know if people know that game, but that's a mega early iOS role-playing game hit. And they were responsible for those as well. Okay. So they made good money, and I think they're still around. But I'm like looking at the games they made, because Crime Crackers, that was their first game, but we never got it here. It was a Japanese launch game for PS1.
For PS1, okay.
Yeah, and then they did Rapid Reload, which did come out here. And yes. No, it was a European release, Gunner's Heaven. This was kind of a prelude stylistically to Wild Arms. It's actually really interesting to look at the cover because it looks like Rudy and Cecilia with guns. But anyway, I'm talking about nothing right now. Okay.
But I like that. I like what you're saying. Introduce these to new players, possibly younger players, people that missed them on the PlayStation. And the domino effect will be it could cultivate interest. And then, hence put out new games, continue a franchise, build off a franchise, create something new, something that model.
There's just
that's
so
a
much
special game, magical.
It's funny, man, because I often talk about G.I. Joe, like how I would fund a G.I. Joe game myself, and I would. And maybe one day we will try to do that. But
that would be amazing. Oh,
I would shit myself if I ever got permission to do that. It would
be so sick.
I don't even know what I would do with myself at that point.
Talk about fan service.
But Wild Arms is one of those games too. It's like, man, give me, I don't know, $20 million and 30 people and 3 years. I'll make a Wild Arms game.
3 years, you think? Yeah.
I think you can do it in 3 years.
I like it. I like your
Final
courage.
Fantasy IV was made in like 8 months or something like that.
That's insane to think about.
I don't even know how that was possible. I literally have no idea how that's even possible. But they did.
Too crazy. Wow.
All right, my friend. Let's not talk about good things anymore. Let's talk about bad things. Game of Thrones Season 8. This is our final Game of Thrones conversation.
Can you imagine?
And we've gone on and on and on. It'll probably be about 20 hours all told of Game of Thrones content for you guys. So we spent the last 3 months really going back through this show. I've enjoyed the process a great deal. We've already picked out our next show that we're going to do. Should we tell them? No, let's not tell them.
No, let's make it a surprise.
And we're going to start doing another show in August. I think some of you will be pleased. I'm actually kind of low-key excited about it. And
I think it's going to be fun.
I think it's
have
you
seen, without letting the cat out of the bag, you've watched the show?
Yes.
And I haven't. So it's going to be super fun.
Yes. I think you're going to love it. At least the beginning, but we'll see. But we've dedicated a lot of time in interstitial weeks, basically, to get through Game of Thrones. And I've enjoyed, like I said, the process. It's been a little annoying because I've like this week, I'm like, I really want to play Wild Arms, but I have to sit down and watch movie-length episodes of Game of Thrones instead. And that's fine. There are bigger problems to have. But I'm curious, before we even get into anything the audience says, before I say anything about how I feel about this season, I'm curious, what do you think of this last season? What do you think about being done? How has the experience been? And talk to me in any way you choose.
I'm so proud of our epic journey, coming all this way, journeying this far, seasons 1 through 8. And, don't forget, I know I talked to you guys about this earlier in our conversations in the earlier seasons, but I only went through Game of Thrones my first time around in mid-February 2020 is when I started. And I got through it in a week because I was bedridden with a really bad sinus infection. So that's basically all I did was just binged Game of Thrones in this 5, 6, 7 days, however long it took me. But I had only seen season 8 once all the way through. Now, I had started the show a couple of times if you got through the first 2, 3, 4 seasons and did that, and then watched again, of course, for our conversations. But 8 was a surprise to me. And by the time I started watching 8 initially in 2020, there was already so much talk done to death about how bad episode 8 was. So I went in with a real, unlike the other seasons, I went in with this kind of a bias with that chip on your shoulder saying, oh no, like, what did they do? I have to tell you, man, I don't think this season gets bad until midway through the last episode. I went in with a whole new set of eyes, a brand new, fresh set of goggles, and just looked at it as objectively as I could. And I'll tell you, I really, really ended up enjoying the ride. Now, there's problems, and we really hit the problems. We really got to pump the brakes at the middle of episode 6. But I have to say, I have to kind of develop my posture early on. I think for the most part, I enjoyed the ride of this season, and I don't know what I was misremembering, and I don't know what I know what a lot of the problems are. I know what the things that a lot of the people complain about, and a lot of the fans kind of, come away heartbroken after the end of the show. But I got to tell you, I think, it moves at that breathless pace. It's unrelenting, just moves quickly. But I kind of really dug it, and we'll get into the nitty gritty. But what about you? What's your mile high perspective on the season going in?
It's hard because I think, first of all, I agree with you. What's there is pretty good. And I kind of always felt that way. I know some people don't feel that way. I'm like, this is fine. I mean, but it feels to me, and I wrote this, I want to make sure I'm getting this right in my notes. Yeah, I wrote down that it feels to me like the last season is like watching a spoiler reel. It just goes from plot point to plot point as it accelerates and accelerates and accelerates. And it's a compliment to the show because you don't want it to go that fast. You see all of this stuff happening. It's not really fair to call it 6 episodes because they're so long that it really does come out to more like 8 episodes, like kind of an equivalent length of the previous season. It's just that when a story like this collapses on itself and you want it to be resolved in some way, you can't begin the resolution in the last season and then do it all in 6 episodes. It just seems, I don't know how to put it. It's like, I don't want to say it's disrespectful to the source material because the source material doesn't exist anymore at this point.
Right.
It just seems like it goes back to what I was saying, I think in the last episode, Dig, which is why did HBO allow this to happen? I agree with you. It's fine. But when you look at it, it could have been so much more. I don't know that anyone, I mean, maybe you would feel different, but does anyone claim that these last few seasons are anywhere as good as the beginning of the show, the first few seasons? No way.
No.
Not even close. I mean, who would possibly make that claim? It's not even close.
I won't argue
with that. I think, so it's like saying, it's like how we would feel about if Mad Men didn't end as strong as it did. It's like, well, what the fuck was the point of this? I mean, the journey is fun, but that's so unsatisfying. But imagine if they ended Mad Men badly and then they did it in like 3 episodes instead of really having an intentional like end to the show, which they did. It seems like they got their bullet points in their notes. They have their slate of characters. Many of them live. There aren't that many deaths in the end at the end of the show.
No, there really isn't.
And they kind of put everything together, but it felt to me like 6 episodes done that should have been 25. And it's a compliment because we didn't want, at least I can only speak for me. I didn't want it to end that way where it was just like, it was like craziness. I think the one thing that shows how crazy the last season is in terms of its pace is just the shit with Varys. Like before you know it, I remember Varys being like, he's in his room and I'm like, what is happening? I don't even really understand this. It's just so quick. It's just quick. So fucking quick. And like an entire season, and I was saying this to Michael when we were watching it, I'm like, you could have dedicated and should have dedicated an entire season to the Nightwalkers assaulting Westeros. That should have been that one season of the show.
Absolutely. Oh, you could have got at least 3 episodes
as it breaks through the various lines and all the different battles and all of the different, and also very curious what's happening in the rest of the world. It would have been a real nice taste to be able to kind of like, there's normal shit going on in the rest of the world. Like they're not dealing with these problems at all. And I'll also say this is probably my biggest problem. And I'm sure it's in the book or will be in the books. If it's not, they never explain what winter is. Like they never even indicate what it means. Like what did it mean when winter used to come? How is this winter any different other than the Night King? It's already out of winter. You were talking about winters lasting for years and years, but at the end, when they're going beyond the wall, there's a sprout coming up, indicating that the snows are thawing. To me, it's just not satisfying. It feels like what I said last time, which is just vignettes. And it felt like reading a spoiler log on Reddit. That's like what this episode felt like. It's like, yeah, Jaime gets with Cersei and he kind of goes back and yeah, it's like, okay, so that was like a bullet point. And then, yeah, the Mountain fights, the Hound. Okay, that's a bullet point, and
they're checking them off one by
right, but
one.
it never lets it develop. And then I'm surprised at the pacing. Sometimes they just stay on shit for too long. They stay on characters no one cares about. Like, no offense, but Grey Worm. Like, why do we so focus on him?
Yeah.
When it's just so. I know it sounds like I'm being negative, but I really do think it's like because of the positive that was the potential positive, and HBO should have been a better steward of the show. And I'll just continue to say that forever. I know that the whole thing about these guys, the showrunners wanting to go do Star Wars and all that kind of stuff. And at that point, it would have been like, okay, fuck you then. You don't get what you want then. We're going to have some other people do the show now. You can go do Star Wars, which you never even got to do anyway. And
no, they never did. No.
And you're not, but it's just like, you don't own the show. I don't know where they got off, like giving them that much power. And just if I were at HBO, I'd be like, we got to just stop. Maybe we can come back to it. But I know that seems crazy, but when you think about all the characters that are still alive at the end, there's nothing stopping them from literally redoing much of this if they wanted to. And we'll talk about that later. So that's kind of how I feel. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense. I mean, the network kind of seemingly kowtowing to the creators or the showrunners it does seem kind of odd. That's a nebulous thing. That's the thing that doesn't normally happen. Even if that showrunner is, a powerful, sought after entity, you think of your Vince Gilligans and these other guys and girls that just are star-studded in every way, or have, come with that. Matthew Weiner, right? Same thing. Like, come with that project or two that you've done, that heralded thing, ushering in the golden age of television and all that. But I'm not even sure Benioff and Weiss really are of that status. I mean, maybe after, creating the first 5 seasons of Game of Thrones.
I'm pretty sure that they said themselves that they were shocked that they were even allowed to do the show at all.
So crazy.
Based on their lack of experience, So
yeah, they were pretty green.
It seems like they got big heads or something. And then you have the audacity to go and to ruin this for Star Wars. Come on, man. I mean, no offense. I know that must be, imagine if they came down and you want to make a Star Wars movie, but yeah, okay. But I don't know. It's just ironic that it was never made, and it's Star Wars is just so devoid of creativity right now. And I think that like I haven't watched the Obi-Wan show because I'm not going to watch it, but I did watch all of the Red Letter Media reviews of Obi-Wan. So that's how I've seen the show. Yeah,
they were pretty soft on it.
They were. That's how I've seen it. That's the most I'm going to see of Obi-Wan.
Okay, so you're not even interested in watching what they're talking about. You just take it from those dudes.
Yeah, I just kind of get the idea, from them. Okay. So it is just funny to me that they kind of sacrificed Game of Thrones at the altar of Star Wars. It's just such a shame. But
yeah, and letting Game of Thrones breathe, giving it more, letting it air out, giving it an additional season or 2 or 3 or whatever would have also contributed to the equation of a lot more money. So it doesn't even make sense in that regard alone. Just the revenue, the sheer revenue that more and more well done Game of Thrones could have brought in. It's pretty crazy that you would push yourself away from the table early and just say, let's get it done. Let's wrap it up. And it does feel like that, even though a lot of it's good. You're dealing with an amazing story, amazing characters, and all these character arcs. You want to savor it. These are delicious characters. These are rich, delicious, some of the best on television ever. You want to really be with them, enjoy it, understand it. And a lot of the stuff too that you were saying, like winter, the advent of winter and what that means in this world, and maybe explaining more about the dead and what that means, and the cyclical nature of the way things happen in this place. But we never get any of that.
You're right. It just seems you would want to rush the ending. Like when a show gets canceled and like, we got to wrap this thing up.
Yeah.
It just, you weren't under that kind of pressure. It just seems so self-manufactured. I'm confused by it. However, we of course have many listener inquiries from Patreon, patreon.com/lastnamemedia. And Joe B wrote in, he says, hey guys, call me crazy, but I don't hate the final season like so many others. While it does feel rushed, I don't know what the alternative was. Each season had multiple storylines being followed, and that allowed each to feel more drawn out. Now that all characters merged, we simply have, he says, less storylines, fewer storylines, Joe, to follow. And that means the few we did follow needed to progress at a faster pace. This season pays off the prophecy told of nobody being able to kill the Night King in quotes, as well as the fierce rage Dany gives hints to having for 8 seasons finally coming out, not to mention Drogon destroying the throne and ending the vicious cycle he saw kill his mom. While Bran as king does indeed suck, I did enjoy Game of Thrones giving us one final twist by not giving Jon the crown and instead ending with the camera focusing on him leaving to the wildling territory. So how do you feel about that? I mean, do you think this idea that like what were you supposed to do is relevant? I think that there's something to be said about that, more because George Martin didn't give them any material other than certainly the bullet points, as we said here. So they had to kind of make it up on their own. But do you think that this was about as inevitable an ending as maybe could have been imagined? Because it's certainly true, to Joe's point, that a lot of people don't like the endings to a lot of things. So
right.
Would this have ever been immune even if they did it in quote unquote right? What do you think?
Yeah, the ending always elicits the most criticism because that's it. There's nothing else to criticize. It's all culminating in that one moment, in those last minutes, those last hours, whatever it is, and that's going to be the end of it. So there's nothing more to sculpt or shape or hope for. I do agree with Joe B in the fact of I don't hate the season as much as many people do, right? And we already talked about that. I think it's good in a lot of ways, but I disagree with Joe in the fact that I think that almost everything in this entire season could have been borne out and allowed to breathe and sort of stretched and slowed down. With the one exception, I would say Dany's merciless, unhinged assault on King's Landing, which is almost an entire episode, and it's kind of hard to watch. In a way, it's wonderful in a way, but just her going crazy, going full on Targaryen on King's Landing is the only moment or episode in the entire season I feel like they did justice to in length, because you're really there with Jon, with Grey Worm, with Arya in the streets, with Jaime, there in the assault with Bronn, with the Mountain, with Cersei. You're really there. You're really allowed to immerse yourself in that whole horrific thing that happens, that whole horrific event. But otherwise, I would say I have a lot of ideas for how you could stretch it out. The battle with the dead at Winterfell. I feel like that could have been easily 2 episodes. Almost everything, A to B, B to C, C to D in this season could have been drawn out. And I think, again, at the center of that, Kyle, is just you want to get more of the characters. There are a lot of characters that made me realize in watching this final season, you have characters like Gendry, Beric, I would argue Tormund, Podrick, Lady Mormont, maybe even Davos to some degree. You could have gotten, just in stretching it out and elongating everything and giving us more and slowing down and letting it breathe, you could have got more of those characters in there, some of those beloved characters. I would even say characters like Bronn and stuff like that, who they seem to kind of shoehorn in.
Yeah, he disappears.
He kind of disappears.
Well, they basically kind of write it. It just seems so impossible for me to believe that he wouldn't be involved in the fight. But they write it as such where he's like, I'm not doing this. And he bounces.
I'm out.
Yeah. And then he comes back and you see him again at the King's Council at the end when he's kind of repaid his debt, so to speak. And it actually laugh out loud funny when Tyrion like calls out all of the different things he is now.
Oh, it's so good.
Is the debt paid? Yeah.
But they're blasting through. You really do, as wonderful it is. And I think, again, you're anchored by a lot of the production value, which I do think is good. And of course, the amazing acting. Even Peter Dinklage is back. We talked about him kind of stepping down and taking a hiatus from good acting for some reason in episode 7.
Yeah, they seem salty during that season. Yeah. He's
back in full swing. And I think a lot of it, so you're just enjoying it, but it does move at such a pace. You're like, whoa, hold back, pull the reins a little bit, pump the brakes. And it does give you that, it does have that energy. It does have that runaway locomotive energy, even though it's still good, if that makes sense. The only thing I would want to see is it's slow down. And I think really where it does finally, for me, go off the rails is when in that last episode 6, probably about halfway through, where they're establishing that new order of rule. All the who's, all the lords of Westeros, now lords of Westeros, are kind of sitting around and establishing what things are going to look like. That's where, for me, I was like, this is fucking ridiculous. That's where I would just, even the first time around watching it, it just didn't sit well. It just felt like, all right, it felt like an epilogue when we could have gotten an entire another season out of that, probably.
Yeah, the political reorganization of Westeros upon tens and tens of thousands, not 100,000 or more people just dead.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unclear what the population of the entire place is. I'm sure it's online somewhere, but they lost a lot of people. I mean, they say they lost tens of thousands of people in the north alone. So you would think that the political reorganization and again, getting the rest of the world's like, what is going on? Also, isn't Westeros like really vulnerable right now? I don't know. I just think there's so many different ways you could have played it. I agree. And that ending is cool in the sense that it's cool to see everyone together and like who's left. Right. I like when the camera's going around and Davos is like, I'm not sure I get a vote, but like I think there's like some pretty funny moments. Also, when Edmure gets up and she's like, just sit down.
So
it's just
good.
so it's like there are some really funny moments.
There's good comedy in this season and good levity. I never hear that mentioned.
Well, it's true that the Tormund thing in episode 2 actually made me gutturally laugh because I had totally forgotten about it.
So
he's like, I killed a giant when I was 10, and then I climbed right into his bed with his wife. When she woke up, you know what she did? Suckled me at her teat for 3 months, thought I was her baby. That's
it's
good
so
shit.
Good.
That's good shit. I was dying.
Tormund is... I'm going to make an Everybody Loves Tormund t-shirt.
You should. He's awesome. And you see him, he lives, which is cool. I mean, you see him at the end.
Thank God.
Which is very un-Game of Thrones as well. I felt like the stakes were not as high as I thought. You would assume almost everyone would have died. In fact, I wouldn't have minded if they either lost or that almost all of them died and like stopping it, but it was like almost for nothing. There was a lot of potential for that. And in fact, let's get into the next question because I think it allows us to examine what might be a strength or weakness of this season, depending on how you look at it. Chad Lewis wrote in and said, hello, brothers Moriarty.
Chad.
Chad, as 311 would say, one of my biggest beliefs I have about the overall issues with both the show and the books is the idea that none of this matters, in quotes, because the White Walkers are coming. And it is, in fact, a truly bad idea. As a matter of fact, I think it's the reason why George Martin hasn't finished the books. At first glance, it may seem cool to have this off in the distance, ominous threat that is the true villain. However, as this greater danger approaches, asking viewers and readers to let go of their allegiances in many of the rivalries the show is built upon, all of the emotions we've invested in this are a letdown of epic proportions and is what led us down to the rush battles and quick character demises we see in seasons 7 and 8.
Okay.
Undrawing the lines in the sand and strategies that had 7 seasons of building just isn't as interesting as seeing the wars of men play out. There is something to be said about this. This is why, although the very first chapter of the book and the very beginning of the show makes this impossible, there's something interesting about this having never actually happened. Because remember we talk about how no one really understands, like things are so old and no one even really knows why the wall is there and the Night's Watch is whatever. And the crows are looked at as kind of just the, rapers and murderers. And it would have been an interesting turn for the threat not really to have ever been there at all, or for the threat to have been much more internal and like they're paying attention to the outside stuff when they really need to be paying attention to the evils within. There is something to be said about that. But regardless of this zombie-like movement, which is another disappointing thing, it's just zombies at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Do
True.
you think there's something that, because there is a lot of conspiracy theory, I know the conspiracy theories about why George Martin's not releasing these books. And one of them is that people think that he doesn't know how to end it. And there is something interesting, like people, as you said here, I think, he kind of wrote himself into these situations. And at the end of the day, it is just a good versus evil story. So people have these grand expectations. These books are fucking huge. And then you're going to end it all in this like very little bit of time with just a very binary kind of good versus evil thing. Do you think that maybe having this overarching villain was actually not what was one of the deficits of the storytelling, and that we really actually only care about the Westeros nobility and not
that's a great point. I'm sure it does kind of take on that guise for a lot of people. I wonder if George Martin is scared off by the reaction to the ending of the show as well, if that kind of played into his flop sweat with, who knows? I know he's long been delivering late and behind and all that, but I wonder, I'm sure he wasn't helped. I'm sure he wasn't encouraged by the reaction to the ending of the TV series. But for me, I really like the model of enemies sort of forming an alliance to fight against the common enemy. You have, in many of these cases in Westeros, we get 5 or 6 seasons of witnessing these ancient hostilities, and sometimes centuries long old grudges, these well-established things of, the North, for instance, versus the South, and these families and these kingdoms that have had bad blood for many, many, many years and many generations, having to kind of put all that aside against the common enemy. And then if they're successful against this common threat, how it's going to fall out and look once they have to sort of take the place as enemies again and stand against each other, or how that dynamic would change, and maybe there would be alliances formed that were long lasting. Who knows? But I do like that. I think that's very interesting, and I think kind of standing the story on its head and really changing it 180 midstream is kind of exciting. But again, I think we got a lot of the beforehand, but we didn't get a lot of the afterward. Again, if it reads like an epilogue, it's the better part of 40 minutes after. Not after the dead are dealt with, but after Cersei is dealt with. It's like 45 minutes and then the show ends. So we don't get a lot. Now, now we should say too, they're talking about this sequel series based around Jon Snow. So that could be really interesting. But as a standalone show for the initial series, it's very top heavy and we don't get a lot afterwards. Which, it's not always that's not always a bad thing, but it just feels everything that comes after the battle with the dead and everything that comes after that ultimate battle with Cersei and King's Landing and the Gold Company and everything, it just feels tacked on and hurried. There's no.
The Golden Company shit is absurd, totally absurd. The whole thing, how they introduced this general character and all this, and goofy
it
shit.
Is. You almost think there's a lot of it that landed on the cutting room floor because it's so washed over and done. It's like, who even is this guy?
Yeah, who cares? Who cares? They're just mercenaries.
These
These are Hessians, basically. It doesn't matter at all. Like, I totally agree. That was bizarre. But one of the strong parts of the show, I think, is actually the second episode. And Drew D'Amato wrote in about it. He said, "Hey, bros, hope you're both well. While the season is certainly a disappointment, to be honest, I think the second episode is one of the best of the whole show. In a kind of out of context way, the character pairings are incredibly awesome. From Tormund talking about where Giant's Bane came from and Jaime knighting Brienne. It's a shockingly stellar episode in an otherwise disappointing season. What are your thoughts? P.S. Hope you turned your brightness up for season 3 of the show." I've long since given up seeing anything in season 3. Season 2 is a very strong episode, though. I totally agree. It's where most of my notes come from. It's called A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. And I'm wondering what you make of that episode and the different pairings that kind of everyone's gathered around talking, telling stories, drinking. And it is a cool collection of people, Gendry and others, it just all coming together. Of course, Beric, my boy, my favorite.
The best.
So what do you make of that episode and kind of the quiet before the storm as they're building up tension? That episode gets it right. But this is why that entire attack should have been 10 episodes, a whole season, because that could have been several episodes of just the quiet percolating of waiting. They're waiting. Maybe even night turns to day again and nothing happens. And they're kind of like, oh my God, they're hungover and they're waiting and they're waiting and they're waiting, and all this storytelling and all of this stuff we've been waiting for, this exposition. It's a tease of what could have been. And it goes back to my thesis about this season, which is just that it's a compliment that we want more. It's a compliment. And so I would have loved episode 2 for half the season. And I love it. Brienne getting knighted and all that is the best. What do you think?
It's wonderful.
Yeah. So tell me about the second episode and how you feel about it.
I mean, this is Game of Thrones at its best. We've talked about this all along the way when characters sort of mash up or meet for the first time or characters are reunited, because this is one of those episodes that lets the story breathe and really gives you the characters just in sitting around drinking, in conversation, in exposition, whatever. It just works, whether it's Jaime knighting Brienne or them sitting around enjoying wine together before the battle, or Jon and Arya finally reunited, Arya and Gendry's sort of blossoming, odd, weird, but somehow tangible romance that's happening there. So you're getting a lot of those character moments with a lot of characters that we're really into, good or evil, it doesn't matter. The characters that we're really invested in, and we're able to enjoy them now. And I think that's what this series has done the best all along the way. And this is sort of returning to the well in the last season and really letting us enjoy that.
Yeah, I agree. It's there was something really cool about the slowness to it. I'm a big fan of some of these characters, so some of the characters I like most lived. Like I was happy to see Davos live. I really like his character quite a bit. But seeing someone like Jaime die, it's like, oh, that's tough. And Jaime kind of reverting back to his old self in some way, which is interesting. But Brienne kind of getting her knighthood, and there's a lot of fear and a lot of, again, they should have really let it linger for a while.
Let it linger.
You know,
that's it.
But
you
they
said
didn't.
It, baby.
They didn't.
No.
The next episode after that, though, is all about the combat, the one-off battle, basically between good and evil, and we can barely see it. Mark Elfring wrote in and said, as someone who watched The Long Night the day it released, I have to ask, did they correct the contrast or lighting for streaming? After buying a 4K TV just weeks prior to this episode, I was convinced I had made a grave mistake. Despite finding the episode to be trite and ridiculous, I had to watch it 3 times to see everything that happened. Your medal and fortitude for toughing out the end of Game of Thrones and the prequels in such a short time frame for KnockBack should be awarded a medal.
Hey,
all the best. Thank you, Mark.
I'll take it.
This is a very contentious episode for a lot of reasons, but the darkness is a mystery to me. And I watched it originally on a shitty TV, and I couldn't, shitty flat screen 1080p TV, and I couldn't see it at all. I have 4K LED TVs, and I can't see shit, so nothing changes. Now, of course, these new TVs, it's LED, right? That is the that, I think that's right. That let me make sure I'm getting that right, because I'm not very technical. But I think that's the one, that has like the really sharp ultra blacks and ultra whites.
Yeah, the UHD.
Right. Yeah, like I'm pretty sure that's right. Oh, yeah, OLED, right.
Yeah.
So I have those TVs,
right.
and so that's going to make the whites whiter and the blacks blacker anyway, and make that all pronounced. So that doesn't do any favors to this. In fact, it probably makes it worse. I don't know, but I'm confused by the aesthetic of this show. I'm wondering what you think of it, because I think about a movie we both love, like The Witch, and how much The Witch is so beautiful, consistently beautiful, because they don't use any lighting other than natural lighting and candlelight. That's it.
Right.
And it makes it look real. This show does a pretty good job of that, but the lighting in the show is still really saturated. When you're in the Red Keep, when you're in King's Landing, when you're in the South, when you're over the Narrow Sea. So it's not always like they didn't have this insistence throughout the entire show of having no unnatural light. So no artificial light. So when I go to this final battle, part of you can say, like, well, it's fucking cloudy as hell. There's no starlight. There's no moonlight. And this is the way it would have looked. And that's kind of cool. But it's a TV show. It's not a book. Like, you can say that in the book whenever that happens.
Yeah.
It is complete chaos. No one can see fucking anything. But here, I think you had to kind of do it a little bit differently. And so before I even go any further, what do you think about the aesthetic? Did that bother you as well, not being able to see anything? It reminds me a lot of like a Richard or Michael. I was going to say Richard Bay, not Richard Bay. Michael Bay. People probably don't even know who Richard Bay is. Michael Bay Transformers movie, where it's just toys smashing against each other. You have no idea what's going on. Like, I think you're totally fine. Just, they could have literally put brackets and said like sword fighting.
Yeah.
For I don't know what I was even looking at half the time, and I'm not trying to be dramatic. I just do not get what the point of these battles are. It's like what they always make fun of on Red Letter with the prequel droid, 8 million clone troopers, 7,000 lightsabers. Like, what is this shit? It's so stupid. If you look at something like Saving Private Ryan, that's so deliberate in its portrayal of total war. This is comical, and I'm wondering what obviously one's real and one's fake, but what do you think?
The only thing I could think of with episode 3, first of all, it is jarring because it's a standalone episode that looks, the book ending episodes don't look like this. It's just episode 3. Now, of course, it's the battle at Winterfell against the dead, against the whites. So it's a very specific event. But I could only think that the strategy was to help create an air of horror, fear, hopelessness, whatever. And I think there are moments where that sort of aesthetic choice really pays off. For instance, when the Dothraki are riding out with their blazing scimitars against the dead, and you just slowly see that wide shot of the lights getting extinguished and their noise of the howls dying down as the whites are they ran into, one of the most fearsome armies the world have ever seen is being extinguished by this army of the dead in seconds, in minutes it's happening. So And I like the way the aesthetic, the lighting choices, and the darkness plays into moments like that. The whole thing with Melisandre too, with her fire magic and the whole thing of having to light the trenches and everything. I like the way that darkness is set against the flames, whether it's that, the trenches, the flaming arrows, whatever. But it is an odd choice for lighting. One person I watched a review or retrospective on the season mashed it up against one of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Ring movies. And it was one of the battles, and it was too far the other way. Peter Jackson's cinematic thing was, because everything was just washed in this bright blue, and it was supposed to be at nighttime, and it was goblins and orcs, and it was supposed to be horrific, but it almost looked like a cartoon in comparison to how they handled it on Game of Thrones, which actually gave me more of an appreciation for the way GOT handled it in a way. But it is very off-putting. I remember seeing that for the first time. I have like a little, whatever this is, 16-inch flat screen TV in my studio by my couch, and that's where I saw it the first time. And I remember thinking like, oh shit, like trying to like push the contrast so I could see what was going on without realizing that was kind of the intent. It almost reminds me of Christopher Nolan's Batman movies with the volume. It's like, why is everything so expertly crafted, but you forgot to take care of the sound? The audio levels are just not right. So it reminded me of that. But for the most part, I got to say, even in this, especially in this most recent watching, it didn't really bug me that much.
On one hand, I'm not sure what I'm even would be looking for, because it's just bodies colliding with each other. And there is something cool about that one shot when the horde comes together with the undead, and they just mix up and it gets like really silent and the bodies just collide, because that's the way those kinds of fights would go in real life. And one of the things, not that the whites are real, but with two human armies, they would ride at each other like that and collide. And it's so stupid. Old warfare is so dumb, but modern warfare is dumb too. I mean, it's all dumb. But
every time I see something like that in a movie or a TV show, I think I think I'm riding the other way. I don't even think I'm brave enough to even be a part of that.
Yeah, I don't know how that all goes. It's very interesting. But there is that, the one thing I think that they play with the dark that I think is cool, because you're right, that the way the fire, that's probably the intent, is the way the fire appears throughout the episode, it really pops. But I love that they keep showing the dark like in front of the soldiers, and they're waiting, and they keep showing it. You expect something to happen. I thought it would have been kind of cool. I know that the horde goes out to meet them, but I think it would have been kind of cool if that just suddenly, they just were there, running full speed in a mass, and the fight just begins that way. However, I was wondering if you had this fundamental problem that I did with this, which is they know, based on their experiences above the wall, that the undead can actively turn those who have recently died against them.
Right.
Now, this isn't a problem for the humans fighting the existing whites, because they're doing it with dragonglass, so the dragonglass is destroying them or whatever. However, every one of them that dies becomes an enemy soldier. And I was confused why they were so open to fighting. I was saying, like, wouldn't you have taken all this time to create like this massive stone, like, or not a stone wall, a moat? They'd obviously do the fire and all of that, but like make something really enormous, but let them come to you as much as possible. Have like some sort of plan to get to burn bodies, have all of your weapons firing, I don't know. That kind of bothered me, because I was like, this seems needless, but maybe there's a hopelessness to it where like our only option is to actually fight them head to head, even though every one of us dying just joins their ranks. It doesn't really add up. And maybe this is the conundrum that they're having with ending the show. Does that bother you at all? Did you think about that?
Yeah, there's all kinds of logistical things like that where you think, okay, that maybe they could have done this a little differently. I was thinking, even, did I miss it? Did they play up any moments where you could actually clearly see that there was obsidian or dragon glass arrowheads, for instance? There's one part where Gendry has a bunch of, it looks like spearheads, but were they using obsidian tipped arrows? Because you would think keeping your distance and destroying them that way would be the best use of your obsidian. I know they had a lot of it. Apparently they were mining it at Dragonstone, but things like that. It's like, not only that, but you think of like kind of, you go into this for the first time and you're thinking, all right, they have an undead, the Night King has an undead dragon. He's got undead Viserion, right? It's like one dragon versus two. And their army is, the dead's army is what, 10 times as large as whatever man could cobble together. So you're kind of nervous for mankind going into this battle, right? Especially just because of the advent of having a dragon. And the dragon turned out to be this totally underpowered thing. It was like this weapon of mass destruction that they had. It just turned out to be kind of almost a non-issue in a way. They had this great thing in this undead dragon. You think, all right, they got this trump card, but it turned out not even to be a thing. So I think they could have, I like a lot of what they do with this battle and creating the horror and creating, it looks like there's a couple of times in there where the tide of the battle seems to be going against the humans, and it looks like they've all but lost, but drag that out, and put more in there for a couple of episodes at least to make it really look like a proper struggle.
Totally. I totally agree. There's something missing with this arc because they are just zombies, but they're not. You can't really compare them to The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead doesn't have a leadership or sentience. What were they even doing? Like, I don't see, in slowing down the end of the story and spreading it out more, we could have gotten, I wouldn't have minded necessarily a glimpse from their perspective. Like, there's gotta be some sort of intent or organization or origin story or something. Go back in the past, very Lord of the Rings style, but they do that in this too. I mean, Bran goes back into the past in his visions, and that's how we learn about who Jon is and all the rest. So I just feel like it kind of sucks that it reduces to a zombie. They don't spend enough time. Maybe they do in the books, but they don't seem to spend enough time making it clear who these people even are, what this force even is. And I still have a hard time understanding the full scope of their world and the effect that this could have on other places. And we know that Arya is going and exploring other unexplored parts of their planet and all the rest, but that's a fundamental problem to me. And I agree with this notion that it's kind of a little anticlimactic. I wouldn't have necessarily minded if it wasn't them at all, or that it ended up being a feint kind of, where it's like, that's not even the problem. We have ourselves to worry about. Maybe that's the whole point, is that we're our worst enemy, not this mystical group. So I don't know. That kind of left me hanging a little bit, because there's more. There's got to be more to it. They're not just this moving bodily horde of mass, just like The Walking Dead. They're not. And they use weapons. They can work. They're somewhat intelligent. I mean, they collapse on themselves to make paths across the fire. They can wield all sorts of axes and swords. And I don't know. I just feel like they didn't really give them their due. And I will reiterate, Micah got so mad at me because I kept saying it. I'm like, the designs of the Night King and his officers just bad. I don't know. I don't know what they could have done. Like you said last time, and I agree with you, the undead horses are super cool.
Those are cool.
I don't know, man. It's just, I was saying, I'm like, this looks like a spirit Halloween mask or something.
Yes, there's something I don't get
what is this? There. This is so bad. Like it just, that's another problem too, because the costuming and the all of it's so perfect. And I was even remarking with the Golden Company, when you see them, they all have like different boots on, different cuirasses, and so it's like there's a lot of work going into it. They could have easily just printed out or gotten 20 million of these boots made and all this and given them all, but they don't, because it makes it more grounded that they're just mercenaries using their own shit, and they all have different helmets and all. So it's all this stuff so well done. And then you look at the Night King and you're like, really? Like, yeah. Why couldn't this be like I think it probably is a person at times, but why couldn't it have been a person?
Yeah, definitely.
Like why couldn't it have been a person, and not this, I don't know.
It's almost 80s action cartoon, camp, half cheesy. Yeah, it almost, the whites and the Night King specifically really look like almost intentionally like 1982 heavy metal video type thing. It's interesting too, Kyle. There's another thing I thought of too, going along the same lines here. There's this weird parody with the Army of the Dead too, because some of these are obviously just peasants or citizens or villagers, right? And then some of them, like when Tormund and Beric return to Winterfell and say whoever's left out there is with the dead now, because they ask about the Kostarks or the Umbers or something, and they basically intimate that whole family is, that all of those bannermen are basically dead now. But they would be soldiers. Mm-hmm. So if these were undead soldiers versus undead villagers or undead old women or something, you would think those people would be in the vanguard, but there's some kind of weird parody where it's almost like it's this unified, disposable cannon fodder army where the strength beyond the whites, beyond the lieutenants and the Night King, the strength is just in the sheer overwhelming numbers, and that each one is just the same equal footing cannon fodder, if that makes sense. Which is weird because you think the warriors that die, look, Viserion dies, becomes an undead dragon. He's still a fucking dragon. He's even more badass. So, you know what I mean? So to establish and giving this another episode or two could have spelled some of that out. And maybe even the Night King, I don't want to make it some video game, this is my true power scenario where you have like, 3 stages of the final boss or something. But maybe, the Night King is thought to be this ultimate evil, this ultimate enemy. And he's just he's just a scout. He's just the tip of the iceberg for what's really coming. And who knows, maybe they do that with this Jon Snow series, but that could have been interesting too. And that could have been another part of the formula for really stretching this out and making more and making them really good and making this look like a proper struggle, because the preparation and the talk and the fear and the strategizing and the commiserating around the war table and everything like that is much more spelled out and stretched out than the actual battle. And so as a result, of course, it's going to feel anticlimactic. We barely got anything. We got one episode of what the fight would actually look like when it came down to brass tacks. And that's just weird writing. It's like so strange that they would make that choice.
I agree. One other thing I wanted to ask you here about this final fight, it's not the last episode, is the Night King getting killed by Arya, which rubs some people the wrong way. Kamza115 wrote in and said, "Hi, Brothers M. What are your thoughts on Arya being the character to ultimately defeat the Night King? I remember when this episode came out, a lot of people were disappointed that Jon wasn't the one to deliver the killing blow. I think the Night King knew that Jon could beat him, which is why when Jon had his chance, the Night King raised the dead to slow him down. I like that it took a different approach to slay the Night King rather than an all-out sword fight. Personally, I thought that it made perfect sense that Arya would be the one to take him out. From being taught sword fighting by Syrio Forel to learning the ways of assassination and skullduggery in the House of Black and White, felt like it was a well-earned payoff to her journey across all 8 seasons. What say you two?" Yeah, I don't have a problem with this. I'm surprised that people do have a problem with it. I love the scene of her dropping the knife to the other hand and stabbing him, and it's super cool. Again, it doesn't make the Night King cool at all, but I think someone had said earlier, and I wasn't smart enough to ever make this connection, but that they say that nobody can kill the Night King, and she is nobody. Like, that's the whole thing, is that she's
shit.
She's trying to become nobody.
What?
And so I think that is the idea, but I don't know for sure. What do you think about that?
That's a great take, dude. Congratulations on that take. That's huge.
I stole that from someone else, so don't. Yeah,
that's fantastic.
I'll take the credit. That's fine.
It doesn't bother me that's Arya. It had to be somebody, right? Here's the thing that I'm a little confused about with the Night King, though. And again, this is kind of those lingering questions that we're left with. He's obviously got some sort of magical, supernatural, precognitive thing going on. When you can't attack him from behind. She lunged into the air, and she's as swift, and she sneaks up on Jon all the time. It's like, what are you doing, that type thing. He knew he turned around in time to catch her by the throat and everything like that. But why? He saw that, but he couldn't see the dagger drop from hand to hand. Little strange. But I like it. I mean, I don't mind. It's so satisfying, by the way, when they're killed with the obsidian or the Valyrian steel and they just kind of shatter into pieces. I love that. But it had to be somebody. Why not Arya? I think it gives her something to do, and I like that. I really like that take about nobody could kill the Night King too, and I think that's pretty cool. It really makes me want more of Arya too, which we know she's going to set out for west of Westeros and be kind of go off on her own
Columbus type.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what I mean? That's kind of like, wow, she really did become a force to be reckoned with after all her adventures.
Yeah, she really did. I don't mind it so much. I like Arya. I like that character. I think You said the thing with her and Gendry is weird. I agree, but it's because they don't let the romances percolate enough.
Yeah.
And that actually brings us to the next inquiry. Mac Daddy X4 wrote in and said the Moriarty brothers are known lovers and not fighters. So do the two of you have a favorite coupling in a season filled with love and romance? We have John and Danny continuing their relationship, nephew and aunt, because we need to keep meeting that incest quota. Sure, it ends in murder, but what royal pairing doesn't?
That's
Jamie
right.
and Brienne pairing up two characters that are really good for each other, even though Jamie decides to go back to his toxic ex. Arya and Gendry finally fulfilling a Stark and Baratheon hookup decades after decades of near misses. Thank you both for 8 enjoyable episodes. That pushing 100 hours of television you had to sit through. Still less time than it will take Dagan to beat Red Dead Redemption. I agree. I can't wait to see it. Try to beat that.
Is it 100, nearly 100 hours?
Oh, of TV?
For Game of Thrones?
Yeah, something like that.
Wow,
yeah, probably.
That's amazing. Yeah.
But so yeah, there is a lot of romance here. Now, I think that one of the unfortunate things about the pace of the season is that it doesn't let the romance blossom. None of it really feels real. The only romance that truly feels authentic is Brienne and Jamie to me. Because that's been bubbling and the tension is there.
Love it.
But they got to let John and Danny kind of like let that marinate a little bit. Grey Worm and Missandei is another good one, and obviously seeing her beheaded is tough. She was a cool character. I liked her with the translator.
Yeah, she was a good character. Fun character.
And so yeah, and Gendry and Arya, none of it feels quite right, but I think a lot of it is just pacing because romance above everything else, you need to believe it. Like love, it's a how do you put it? It's something deeper than I think violence or conflict or argument or whatever. Like love requires an understanding of the nature of the relationship and their interactions with each other and their origins and their conversations and the exposition and all that. And so the pace, while the pace doesn't do any favors to anything, I think in this entire season, I think it almost undoes the romantic pairings and where they're going to go, especially because Jamie and Brienne is undone by Jamie going back ultimately to Cersei. And I think that needed more time too. So what do you think about the romance and kind of how they try to pair everyone up? It's very on Game of Thrones as well, I think, to let all these people kind of have happy endings.
Yeah, it does seem like there's this encroaching sentimentality a little bit in season 8, if anything else, that makes it kind of another one of those things that makes it stand out from the rest of the show. Not that I necessarily mind it, but at the same time, you have that sentimentality seeping in a little bit. I have to give my compliments to a little bit of restraint too in the romance department in season 8, because they don't feel compelled to couple up everybody, and they could have done that. As ridiculous as that would have probably looked. Sansa is not paired off. Tyrion doesn't find love again. They don't feel the need to give Davos a love interest, although it seems like he's flirting with Missandei, or not in this season, earlier in the show, maybe season 6 and 7. And then the romance that we're allowed to sort of witness this season is actually pretty cool. I think the Arya Gendry thing is actually interesting because I like how it gives Arya a little dimensionality. You know what I mean? It gives her a little more dimension in that she is interested in relationships. She is interested in sex and romance and all that kind of thing, but she's this type of woman who's pretty novel in this world, I guess, who doesn't want a relationship. She doesn't want to be hindered by, Gendry proposes to her and, offers her everything. And she's like, that's not for me. So I like that plays into Arya's character a little bit, but she still has the romantic tendencies and all that kind of thing. I think that's really neat. And of course, the love triangle between Jamie, Cersei, and Brienne is a really interesting one. And it's a heartbreaking one. When Brienne begs Jamie to stay, that's a really teary-eyed moment for me.
Definitely.
Where she really sees the good in him, but, that inevitability of both Jamie and Cersei, that's their love for each other, their bond is not only their undoing, but that's their life's blood for each other. And that's the air that they breathe is each other. That doomed relationship is they're so compelled to it, they're cursed by it, and they cannot. It's got the claws in both of them, and it's going to lead to their demise. And I think they both know that throughout the show, but that's it. That's their destiny. That's their fate. And Brienne's kind of caught in the middle. And they also do a thing where I have to give a shout out to Tormund, because he never gets to be with Brienne.
Mm-hmm.
And he really digs her. And you love that character, so you want to kind of see it pay off. And he's a good-hearted dude, although he's this giant killer and he's this fearsome warrior.
He's like, the women don't like me down here or something like that. He's great.
He's the best.
Yeah.
But I like it. And I like, I have to give a payoff to the restraint, because they could have done more with that. And of course, Missandei dying, Missandei dying is one of the things that sparks the war, and what Dany ends up doing, and what Grey Worm ends up doing too, as her top lieutenant. So that's an interesting set of events too that sparks off a big part of the season.
Certainly. Well, let's stick with Brienne and Jaime for now.
Yeah.
Go to Brienne first. Matthew LaConfora wrote in and said, brothers, in the long list of characters done dirty, my mind always skips past the Dany and Jon of Westeros, Dany's and Jon's of Westeros, and heads straight to Brienne. Okay. I feel nothing but confused anger at seeing the most badass female warrior in the show just stand there and cry like a babbling brook when Jaime leaves. How do you guys feel her character was treated in the last season? I get what they were going for, but it just seemed like her and Jaime both did 3 or 4 about faces this season and left me feeling like I misunderstood every motivation they had. I think this is deeper than it seems. Brienne, I don't know. I don't want to say everyone, but people are not uncommonly in love with people that they can't have or shouldn't be with, and they know it. And I think Brienne with Jaime was in some way never gonna be, and was never supposed to be, and she was kind of fooling herself into that, even though they finally had sex and she was knighted, and Jaime clearly loves her and cares about her.
Sure.
But what I really loved about it was Brienne she's above it, and she's a stoic and interesting character. And I love that they kind of resolve it by her writing the extensive notes about him in the book. And when you see that book earlier, and Jaime doesn't really have much of an entry in this book of knights and what they've done, and everyone has their great deeds, and she fills the entire thing in. And I really like that. I think that's a really nice touch. And because they kind of saved each other and gave each other a cause to live, and it could have gone the other way, but it didn't. How did you feel about Brienne's ultimate ending? She lives, and she has a seat at the table, and she is kind of the progenitor of Jaime's legacy in some way.
Yeah, I mean, we're all cheering for Brienne. She's one of everybody's favorite characters because she's so noble and heroic and just inherently good. And I love I gotta say, I really, really enjoy the love affair between Brienne and Jaime and their romance, because it's so tragic. And it's inevitably tragic because Brienne is in love with this version of Jaime. It's a real version of him, but it's a version of this man that he can't stay as for long ever, because he's ultimately beholden to Cersei, and she's evil. And that's who he swears his ultimate allegiance to. So because he's beholden to his love for Cersei, Jaime can't be that man, that other man that he could very well be if he chooses, or if he could just break free of that cursed love for his sister. But he can't. And that's the version of Jaime that Brienne's in love with. And she knows that man is in that husk. It's in that shell somewhere, but he just can't realize it. And I love the way that she doubles down on his love, on her love and her affection for him, and how much she cares for him, even after he leaves, with singing his praises and recording his heroic deeds in the book. That, once that's the one Joffrey was sort of galling him over, initially seasons earlier, where he's like, oh, I see you don't have many things recorded in this book, uncle, type thing. And Brienne solves that, and she's able to, and with her help, he's able to escape that Kingslayer mantle. Right. He's right.
She rehabilitates his image,
absolutely
posthumously.
Right. Exactly.
As far as Jamie is concerned, Jonathan Smitty wrote in and said, compact and disc. I've only got one question for you today. Is there a more insulting and betraying line written for a character than Jamie Lannister saying he cares not for civilians, innocent or otherwise? Of all the insanities committed by season 8's rush to the finish, the undoing of one of its strongest characters in its entirety is what left the most sour taste in my mouth. Stay safe and never forget the night is dark and full of terrible writing. Thank you, Jonathan, for writing in. There is something tragic about Jamie's end, and I don't dislike it. I think it's part of the examination of human nature through the lens of this story, which is no matter what he experienced, no matter the situation he went through, he lost his hand, he's been captured multiple times, he's met this other woman, he's been on all these adventures, and it all goes back to Cersei. It all returns back to the family and the blood, and it's frustrating, but I like it because it feels real. It feels true to the character. I like their end scene. I think Cersei's performance is pretty amazing in that last scene where she's like, I don't want to die, and all these things, and everything's crumbling around them, and he just hugs her and they get crushed. I dig it. What do you think about Jamie kind of reverting back to the mean at the end? We said he's rehabilitated, and it's true because no one knows any of this really happened. I mean, that's the thing, is no one is any the wiser. She's pregnant too. I mean, so no one's the wiser of any of this stuff. Plus, he kills Euron, so he's free on that front. So I wonder, what do you make of Jamie kind of not changing ultimately?
Yeah. And you know what? He didn't care that he was going to die. He just had to die in her arms. That was his whole goal in returning. I love the whole tragedy in this arc because, we're on this ride with Jamie from season 1 on, and his journey through light and dark, and what Kyle said about that being very realistic and about that making a human being have those levels of dimension. It really makes me lament for Jamie and sort of feel for him, because you do wonder, without Cersei in this world, let's say Cersei never existed, what could he have been? What could he have become? And it's also very important to say, Jamie is the only Lannister to report north to Winterfell after Cersei's betrayal. He still goes. So there is that heroism, there is that goodness, there is that nobility there, that honor that he has. And in the same breath, he says it in that monologue when he's talking to Brienne, and he says, like, I would kill anybody, I would do anything, I would commit any atrocity for Cersei. And it's very romantic. And then it's very strange too for us, because then we realize that's a very romantic notion. That's also his sister. We're constantly reminded of that. And then also it's very tragic, because this is underneath all of that. This is a good man, but what's of paramount importance is his duty to Cersei and his love for Cersei. And that comes first. So that evil is what ultimately always takes precedence. And that darkness, and because that's who she is, and that's who he has to be in order to be with her. So it's awesome. And I remember you telling me very early on, Kyle, that Jamie was one of your favorite characters. And I was already like, at that point, I had only watched maybe 2 seasons. And I was like, wow, that's a weird take, because he's kind of a detestable character up to that point. But as you go on this journey with Jamie, you realize there's so much to him. And your heart really breaks for him, because he can't escape the grasp of Cersei. And that's ultimately, you're hoping he does. But after that speech to Brienne, and Brienne's begging him to stay, and he says he'll never do that, that's it for him. You know what I mean? He'll never be the Jamie we want to see. Right.
And I dig that. Yeah, he is one of my favorite characters, because I think that he's on 2 tracks the entire time. He's in this familiar track that he gravitates towards, and then he wants to be a hero. Like, he wants to do the right thing. I think even going back to the Kingslayer thing, like, he was doing what he thought he was supposed to do, and he was, and everyone was there, and no one stopped him, but everyone slapped him with this title that has haunted him and his honor forever. And I really dig his last scene with Tyrion, where Tyrion's crying and hugging or whatever, and saying, like, you are the only person that didn't ridicule me or make me feel, like a monster and all that. And so that there's that other track with Jaime where he's a human, and you see it over and over again. And I really dig that character. In fact, I think it comes out even more in the books, that as I'm reading so far, that he's like a much more conflicted character when
that's cool.
ran out of the window in the very beginning and all the rest. Like he's a much more, in my mind, much more reluctant, and much more enraptured with the woman of Cersei than maybe in this one, where it seems more like family and, I don't know, loyalty. But I don't know enough about the books yet to be able to say for sure. Another thing people want to talk about in this episode, of course, because the other big momentous occasion is the attack on King's Landing. And Mike D wrote in and said, first time through, I didn't mind the final season as much as the others did. But watching it again, I can see how devastating this was and such a waste. I don't think we'll ever see a show like this again, and they rush it to the end. Though everyone was disappointed that Daenerys went bad in the end. Were they not paying attention? It's an interesting... This is interesting because I feel like this was inevitable. And I will always, and people can go back and watch old Kind of Funny episodes, I will always find it hysterical that I called it so many years ago. When people started naming babies Daenerys and Khaleesi and all that, I'm like, you are playing with fire. Like, you quite literally, you don't know how they're going to end this character. And she ends up being exactly like the Mad King. And I like that a lot. They tease it a lot, her temper and all these different things. And it kind of ratchets up as we go. They kill, obviously, the prelude is kind of Sam's family being killed when they're all trying to surrender.
Sure.
And by the way, just as an aside, I find it hilarious that Sam is so upset with Dany when he finds out that his brother and his father were killed. It's like, what do you care, dude? These people were horrible to you.
So
horrible
bad.
To you, especially your father. Like, and he was like all devastated. It's like, what are you upset about? But anyway, I like Dany's turn. I like that it didn't take much. And I dig that that's why I love the bells thing. The old tradition in King's Landing, the bells will ring when they're surrendering. And in fact, you can hear people screaming. And I only caught much of it because I watched shows with subtitles, but a lot of people are screaming, like, ring the bells, like, over and over again at various parts to, like, surrender. So when that happens, you expect, okay, so the war's over and they're going to have to figure out and capitulate and do all these kinds of things. But she goes on this rampage, and she's supported, like you said, by Grey Worm, who's totally down with helping her because they both share the same love, or a similar love, for the person that was killed in Missandei. So what did you think about her ultimate turning and becoming the villain? I feel like I agree. Like, I don't know how you can go into this and not realize that was going to happen. To me, that's like the smallest of all the mysteries, was that Dany was going to become evil.
Absolutely.
I don't know how we could have interpreted it any other way. So that is weird, because for all the problems I have with the last season, that's not one of them. I feel like that was always going to happen. That's why I thought it was funny people were naming their kids Daenerys in 2013, because I was like, she is going to become an evil character and your kid is going to be named Daenerys. So anyway, go on and talk to me about her this last season.
Yeah, I mean, what happens, the atrocity that's committed at King's Landing via Dany, doesn't surprise me. I like you, Kyle, think it was inevitable. I always saw Dany as this conqueror and this warlord. I think from the beginning. I think she operates under the guise of being this liberator, but I think her lust for power and her sort of uncompromising thirst for the Iron Throne, and just her uncompromising nature in all ways. She can't even think to share power. There's nothing democratic about her. I really think that this madness was always sort of behind her eyes. And I think, it comes out, she succumbs to this Targaryen madness eventually. I think you have these people, right, in the Targaryens, and they have this power that's almost supernatural, right? They're impervious to fire. They have control over dragons, some of the most fearsome beasts in the world. And they're all powerful because of it. But the trade-off is they have this inherent, I guess, passed on sort of, what would you say, likelihood for this insanity, right? That there's something behind, there's something wrong with them. There's a rage. There's the quest and the lust for power is just too great. That's what takes precedence, not mercy, not compromise, none of those things. And that all bears out. And that's what, people have been saying about her through the series, but that's what Varys finally saw and was trying to get Tyrion to see. Was like, this is not going to go well. She is going to go from, being the hero we thought she was to being worse than Cersei was ever. You know what I mean? Worse than her worst enemy. And I think, it's so interesting to see that bear out. And it's so tragic because they have this fight. I mean, Cersei's defiant, right? When they meet at the walls of King's Landing and the Mountain beheads Missandei and they're trying to have a conversation. That's when, ultimately that's when Dany snapped and decided she was going to do what she was going to do. And they have a proper war. Cersei basically asked for it, right? After Dany flies in, here comes the Dothraki, here comes the Unsullied. They take out the Golden Company, right? Outside the gates. They get inside. The Red Cloaks and the Lannister army throw down their swords and the bells ring. That's where it should have ended. But instead, that's where it started because Dany just goes on this kill crazy rampage and just takes out all of King's Landing, the peasants, the citizens, the town people, the children, the elderly, and she devastates and she can't even stop herself. It's that anger. And she still says after everything's done and King's Landing is burning and everybody's dead, she says that she liberated that place. So there's this sickness, there's this propensity to madness,
right?
This Targaryen propensity to madness that is ultimately their curse and is ultimately this family's undoing. And she was no different than her father.
I mean, I love that. Personally, I just think that's where it was all going. And so
Me too.
That doesn't bother me at all. I agree with you. All right, let's talk about a couple of other things here. I wanted to bring a couple of other issues to the front that I just thought were notable or that I wanted to get your take on. The one thing I wanted to say was about production itself. Something really sticks out to me in this season because it all takes place in the north for the most part, except for when it goes to King's Landing. But by the time we get to the south, it's snowing down there, which I think is interesting too. You never see their breath and there is no evidence of it actually being cold in the show. And I think this is a huge problem. And I was saying to Micah that they really should have gone out of their way to try to film these things in truly cold places. I know it would have been hard and it would have been uncomfortable and challenging, but this is HBO and it's Game of Thrones. And when there are, I mean, you used to love football and I still love football. Think about like the Packers playing outside and
those old NFL films.
Right. And it's like they're all lined up and the breath is just coming out of the helmets and it's all, I mean, that's good shit. That's the way it looks when it's really cold. It just doesn't look right. And when you focus in on it, it's not good. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. I'm surprised they didn't even try to do that with some CG. And the other part about that that's kind of related is the snow just looks really bad. The snow looks fake. And this is why you should have gone to a truly cold, snowy place and tried to do it right. Imagine if George Lucas tried to film Tatooine in a warehouse.
Sure.
Right? Or Hoth in a warehouse. Like they actually went to these places. In fact, that famous crawl of Luke Skywalker is outside of their hotel because they couldn't film anywhere because it was snowing too much. But it looks right. It looks good. No one will ever say that Tatooine doesn't look like the desert. It's fucking Tunisia. So it is the desert. And while I know they go on location to Iceland and all these different places, I just feel like the winteriness was just not captured. And I don't know how more people aren't talking about this because I feel like the snow especially looks so bad. It looks, when it's sitting on everything, I'm like, snow doesn't look like that. It doesn't sit like that. It looks like it's sprayed on. You see it in the weirwood and with the red tree, especially when they're spraying on the bottom of it. Clearly, there's just a lot of things like this episode or season, very similar to the last season, feels and looks cheaper to me. Yeah, and that goes right on down to that black ass fucking third episode that we were talking about. But just the little things and the practical effects, that doesn't look right. Did that stick out to you at all?
It definitely does. I mean, it does kind of look like 1950s TV episode snow, like like movie set snow. But the thing was that I was confused about, and I wanted to pick your brain. I never got to the bottom of this. Is that supposed to be snow in King's Landing, or is that ash?
Oh, ash. Yeah.
Still settling from the devastation.
That's probably what that is the ash. But that's neither here nor there, because I'm mostly talking about the north. But you're right. That probably
King's
is
Landing. There are times where they do such a good job with the snow on the ground, and it's kind of mixed in with the mud, and it looks like a proper muddy, like you would see on a dirt road in real life or something. But there's other times where there's snow on the walls in King's Landing, and it really looks like powder. They don't make any effort to look like there's new snow over old snow that's melting or icing down the wall.
It's like, have you ever seen snow before, guys? Like this isn't the way it looks.
It's pretty bad for a show with such high production value. But I am still curious if that is supposed to be snow in King's Landing, because the comment there could be that this, winter is coming, the world is changing. This is what winter is going to look like. This is, when it gets devastating like this and you have these 7-year winters, it does snow in King's Landing. It does snow in Dorne. So I'm not sure. But, and there's that weird part where Drogon's covered in the ash or snow. How long could he have possibly been laying there to be covered in ash? You know what I mean? It would make more sense if it was snow. So I'm not really too sure about that.
The another thing I wanted to bring up is this consistent use of the spiral design to. Oh, I hit my camera. I think. Sorry, I don't know.
There you are.
Oh, geez. Well, we'll see. The shot's a little fucked up now, but
hey, there you
it'll be all right. I don't know how that happened. I must have hit my monitor. Was that way for a while?
No, it just happened.
Sorry, let me see if I can make myself look a little better. I don't know. I gotta
go a little bit lower,
so
a little bit higher.
Yeah, it's too much headroom.
There you go. I could see your shirt graphic now.
Trying to make it stay. There we go.
I'm always afraid mine's gonna move.
Maybe that'll be better. Okay. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, again, with the spiral design that they bring up. You see that in the very beginning of the show. Sure. I like when the kid Umber, Lord Umber, I think, goes and tries to get his people, and then they like staple him to a wall basically, and they take pieces of the body and they make it in that spiral galaxy sort of thing. And one of the cool things I thought with the Night King when he dies is that his effect over the bodies around him seems to emanate from him. If you watch it, like people closest to him fall first, and then they're falling outward. Some sort of spiral kind of area of effect. Did you notice that symbol at all? And are you curious? Like, what? Again, it implies they're doing this. They're intelligent. It implies that they're not just zombies. I don't know. Did you want to learn more about that? Did you notice that design?
Definitely. And it's horrific. I mean, that's the thing that they do in the very first episode of the show, right? Where those 3 Night's Watchmen are out on right. And they're out on a scouting party or whatever, and they find that. And I like that. I like those horrific sort of connections to the dead and the Night King. And I think they should have done more of that, because I think it makes it scarier. Because, when Arya's, like you were saying before, they look a little campy sometimes. They're not as frightening. I thought they were a little more frightening at, what was it called? The battle. What was the battle called where they fought with the wildlings against the dead?
Oh yeah, I don't know.
Hardhome, the Battle of Hardhome.
Hardhome, right? Hardhome.
I thought they were pretty scary there, but a lot of times they're kind of goofy, right? So it would be nice to have a little more of those horrific intonations, not just for the symbolism, but again, like you're saying, for that the seeming intelligence that these are not just zombies. This is not just the Walking Dead we're dealing with or Attack on Titan. This is something different. This is something supernatural. And I like that. And also just the atrocity of murdering a kid. I mean, that's a really horrific thing, especially for a season where you feel like, okay, they're letting a little bit of the sentimentality in. There's levity, there's humor. Here's Tormund telling a goofy story. And then all of a sudden it's like a murdered kid pinned to a stone wall. It's like, holy with all these severed limbs around him. It's like, holy shit. It kind of gives me glimpses into what Game of Thrones could have been. And I think I would have liked it a little more like that, because the stakes are higher. You're fighting an enemy who's truly frightening then, you know?
Another thing I wanted to ask you about, or just kind of bring up, I guess, is do the events of this season in particular confirm that the fire god is the real god? This is something they never really get into. Everyone has their own gods, but we only ever see the fire god make himself or herself or itself known. I mean, do you agree? I don't know, because we hear about Baylor and all of that. I think that's the kind of like Jesus-like character that with the star icon. And
Right.
there are all of these different religions across the sea, and the mountain goddess and their mountain mother or whatever they call it, and with the Dothraki and all the rest. But none of these gods or religions make themselves known. Only the fire religion makes itself known, and it makes itself known, obviously. Beric is revived like 7,000 times, and then Jon is revived, and we see all these guys like light their swords on fire. And then obviously we have the Red Woman come in and play a prominent role in the fight at in the north near the wall. So I'm wondering, or at Winterfell. So I'm wondering, does that indicate to you that this is the real god and the real religion, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, it does seem to be intimating that, right? You could only read into it that much because of Beric and Thoros and the Red Priestess and the Fire Religion and the success in the battle. And, you know, the fact that they do a good job in making it seem like, though there's wrong-headed things about that religion too. The Red Priestess makes mistakes. I mean, she comes to atone for it in the end and acknowledges that, but you know, you have these other religions in this world, whether it's the five gods or the Bravosi worshiping the god of the dead at the House of Black and White, or the various religions in Essos and stuff. So I like that it's this, you know, there's multiple religions in this world, but it does seem like they're saying there's something to this fire god and to this specific religion that sort of saves them from the army of the dead at the end.
Yeah, I wish that they go into that more, or would go into that more, because there just seems to be a real religion and then a bunch of fake religions. I don't know if that's the indication, or if that these religions can all kind of exist in perpetuity. Because I guess there is some sort of level of supernaturalism with the House of the Black and White or whatever.
Sure.
But anyway, I wanted to ask you about that. I also wanted to just bring up Lady Mormont. I love that character. Cute little armor. I think it's so funny. She's like got this little suit of armor on, and her killing the giant. What I was thinking about with that was, I was like, I hope someone sees that or knows that happened, because they'll write songs about her and she'll be like known as the giant killer or something like that. So I like that character a lot. We'll see her soon in The Last of Us on HBO. And
Dude,
I was wondering what you
right.
thought of Beric sacrificing himself to save Clegane and Arya. I feel like I love that character, and Micah makes fun of me because he's like, he's never in it. I'm like, I know, but he's so awesome.
He's so underused.
I know it's a shame. He's in the book a little bit more.
But, that's good to know.
But what do you think of him? Beric always seemed, especially after the priest died, he always seemed fixated on Clegane, and like he sees something more in him, or something like he's part of the cycle. And we get to see Arya and Clegane kind of come back together, which I think is really cool.
Oh, it's great
because of it. So what do you think about that whole sequence with Beric kind of sacrificing himself, then Arya and Clegane going to King's Landing together, and then ultimately they split up, and Clegane kind of saves Arya's life. So,
and Beric saying, you know, he's always saying like, we're here for a reason. He's always kind of trying to instill that in the Hound, and his whole thing. Well, he turned out to be there to save Arya, so Arya could, you know, he throws his flaming sword into the undead to save Arya, so Arya could go on and kill the Night King. So the whole thing comes full circle. I love the character of Beric. I think he's kind of Christ-like in a way. I like the impact that he had on Jon, with kind of saying like the whole thing of like why we're here and why are we fighting, and we're fighting for life, even though we're doomed to fail against death. We still have to fight. That's all I know. It's all about protecting an innocent. I mean, how can you not love him? You know, and then his pairing with Thoros, who I thought was another great character. And, you know, the whole thing with little Lady Mormont too. I love the fact we see her browbeating and lecturing Jorah for a little bit. And then when the giant comes in through the gate at Winterfell, and she's just kind of standing there aghast, like she's horrified, just like anybody else would be. And the giant just swats her out of the way. It's such a painful moment. She's like, oh my God, how many fucking bones did they just break from this poor girl? And the fact that she could still lift that axe and fight and stab the giant in the eye. I mean, she took out a giant. That giant was going to do much damage. Thank God it was foolish enough to pick her up. I love it. And then, of course, the Hound and Arya, man. I mean, what a great pairing where they're coming. The Hound's coming in. He's making a beeline for his brother. Arya's making a beeline for Cersei, and the Hound's like, Sandor's like, if you come up here with me and you go through with this, you're not leaving here. So he saves her. That whole thing, their whole journey comes full circle, their whole arc. And, he's in his very salty, very Hound-like way, he saves her.
And I like that she calls him Sandor.
It's so good.
Yeah.
What a great moment.
Yeah.
And it's not too, again, they don't cross over into sentimentality where they're hugging and kissing and saying their goodbyes. The characters stay in character. The show does that so well, and it's nice to see that they're at least consistent with that through the season. And
speaking of, we brought the Hound in the Mountain. What did you think of their conflict? I love when his helmet gets knocked off and you finally get to see him. Really interesting idea. I wish I knew more about the reanimation process. Is this the same reanimation magic that the priestess used on, what's his name?
On John?
No. When the warlord is revived, the Dothraki warlord is revived.
Oh, right. Khal Drogo.
Khal Drogo, right. But he's like kind of brain dead. I wonder if this is like a similar situation, like the same kind of magic. They never really get into it, but I like his helmet getting knocked off and he's just kind of a zombie. And I like how he dispenses with Qyburn because I think Qyburn's a really cool character too. And it would be cool to know more about him, but the disposal of him is very Game of Thrones because it happens very suddenly, but it also shows that the Mountain never cared. And was just like, for some reason, the vision of his brother overrides anything anyone else is saying, including Cersei telling him to like kind of remain in his post. So what did you make of that whole sequence in the end? And obviously they both die.
Oh man, it's so tragic. That's the Hound's thing though. That's his quest, is to exact vengeance on his brother. And he's not going to stop until he gets that. It's almost his curse, it's his anchor to drag. It's his cross to bear. And it's got to culminate in that fight. That battle. I won't say it's got to culminate in victory because I don't really think the Hound's capable of beating his brother, especially the zombified monster version of that monster, But I love the way it pans out. I love the way that Cersei's there and the Mountain's ignoring her, and the quick death of Qyburn. Very, just another death. It's just treated like cannon fodder, like another expendable dude. You got this main character who just, again, they just kind of kick him to the curb, and that's the horror of this world, And the fact that the Hound and that Sandor and Gregor go down together and die together and just sort of fall down that pit and perish in the flames. Apparently, it's a fitting end. It's very poetic, and even when the Hound is getting his eyes gouged out, this character is going to stop at nothing. It's tragic in a way because you want to see Sandor survive. He's been through a lot. He's a very tortured character. You would like to see him be able to walk away and survive and have some sort of chance for a pleasant life after all this. But I think he was doomed to. Those brothers were doomed to go down together in that last blaze of glory.
In the book, I think they talk about it in the show too, that he stole one of his toys and that's why he burned his face.
Yeah, he does talk about that in the show at one point.
Right. And they go into it a little bit deeper where I think the indication is that like this is insanely heinous, like what happened to him as a kid. And I think that it's represented in the character himself. I mean, look what happened to him. And this whole rivalry encapsulates his whole life. And it ends, I think, in a very poetic way. I dig the ending. I think he had to die. I think he was lucky not to die many times before that.
Sure.
And I think the one shame, though, with Sandor is that we get little tastes of it, but we don't get enough of it, of him realizing that he's insane and that like he needs to stop being a certain way. We see it when he buries the bodies that he, was responsible for killing earlier. But we also see it, and I think in a greater way, and I wish they spent more time with it, when he's building that church and he finds that like group of religious peasants or whatever, and he's trying to just get away from this cycle and he can't escape it. And I think he realizes he has to just go right through it and end it. And so he does. Now, at the end of the show, we're left with a coterie of people: Bran, Sansa, Arya, Tyrion, Brienne, Davos, Sam, Robin, Yara, Gendry, a few others. And we find that the North will remain an independent country, which I think is a strange move, very sudden. I mean, I understand that they're independent for a long time, but one of the cool things I like about that last scene is that they talk a little bit about democracy and they laugh it off. And I think that that's really accurate, because I don't think people quite think about it this way, but it's true. We live in a capitalistic society, for instance, but capitalism had to be invented, and it's the latest sequence in a sequence of inventions that needed to happen before it, like, you know, money for exchange and mercantilism and all the rest. Democracy doesn't exist naturally. It needs to be discovered and invented. The Greeks, amongst others, discovered it and invented it and nurtured it. They're not there in their world yet. So like that doesn't even sound plausible in any way, shape, or form. And I think that that's very realistic. I mean, they just totally laugh it off. However, I do think one of the missing sequence, or one of the missing groups in this final sequence for me, were the Brotherhood without banners, because the Brotherhood without banners is the closest we get to some sort of egalitarian nobilityness, not part of their lives.
Sure.
And it would have been cool to have them have a seat at the table too, because they are exploring that idea.
Good point.
But I wanted to acknowledge that was pretty cool. And of course, we're left with Bran the Broken as the king. Bran, the worst character in the entire show. So that's interesting. So what do you think about the end, the so-called breaking the wheel, which I like the term breaking the wheel, but what do you make of the way it all ends, who's living and the decisions they make?
I like that too. Yeah, that whole council meeting of the surviving lords and who's left, the decision makers, the remaining decision makers in Westeros. It just, again, it feels so quick to me. It's like 45 minutes of figuring this stuff out. I do love that bit where Samwell invents democracy and they just poo-poo it. You know, even the most noble amongst them, like Sansa's like rolling her eyes, which is really a really funny bit. And because you think it's going to lead to something, it's like, oh, Sam just hit it on the head. And they're like, fuck that. Like, what? Like, that's great. And laughing. So great. And yeah, there's a lot going on in that last scene, because a lot of these characters you forgot about. A lot of them you feel like, of course, have a place at that table. A lot of them feel like maybe they shouldn't be, they haven't earned that position. And maybe that adds to the realistic nature of it, because you would feel that way probably about any governing body, right? But I love the fact of, Tyrion's speech about its stories that tie things together, because it seems like the show giving itself a pat on the back, which is fine, well-deserved pat on the back, but also, is Bran's story the best? They sort of foreshadow this earlier in the season when Tyrion sits down with Bran to talk to him about his story by the fire over a couple of drinks or whatever, at least for Tyrion. And they don't really show it, but then it culminates in this moment where it's like, I think Bran would be the wise choice. It left me thinking about the Bran character a lot and why he's so unappealing to you and I and a lot of people watching the show. You have this kid character, right? He's from a noble family. He's wrongfully pushed out a window and crippled. He's robbed of the use of his legs. As a young boy, he's 10 or whatever he is at the time. So maybe he's even 8. I'm not even sure. But so you immediately feel sympathy for this kid. And you want to see him, he survives and he grows up, and you want to see him sort of succeed or get his just desserts or whatever. And instead, he develops or inherits this amazing precognitive, magical, supernatural ability to be this three-eyed raven. But the trade-off is that he becomes a husk and he basically loses who he is. He basically loses his humanity. And that's very tragic. And that's really good storytelling, because again, getting away from the sentimentality and everything, it's like this kid kind of got robbed twice. So you should feel extra sorry for him, maybe. But instead, I think because he acts like a robot, and maybe it's just the way the actor's playing it, I'm not sure, but there's something really off-putting about the character, and there's something that sort of emanates from that cold personality and delivery that makes you feel in turn cold towards the character. I can't even remember another instance of sort of ingesting fiction like that. It doesn't usually work that way, but for some reason with Bran, it works that way enough for us to say, I wish it wasn't him that's going to rule Westeros. Because even though it may be a logical fit in a way, I don't know. He's just not a very likable character to me.
Yeah, I think this was probably the intention the entire time. And I get it. And I think that a lot of it is lost in translation because we just don't see very much of Bran or a sufficient enough amount of Bran north of the wall. Like, he kind of disappears for an entire season. I think season 6 or something. Like, I don't think he's even in
something like that. Yeah. So he does. He really does. Yeah.
And so it is weird to see him come back because we don't quite have the context for his importance. But I think that that's probably going to be better delivered in the books. And this brings us to what I have is the final question. We can talk about anything you want that we missed. But Joan Infante wrote in and said, "Hi, bros.
Yo.
Love the Game of Thrones content and all the other things. Thank you. With the recent news that Snow, the new Game of Thrones spinoff that was recently announced, do you think that it can be possibly improve what happened in the final season? Thank you and peace." Thank you, Joan, for writing in.
Thank you so much.
So what do you want for this show? There's two things going on right now. There's some sort of Targaryen prequel, and then there is some sort of Jon Snow driven sequel. I kind of feel like this might be essential because they have got to retcon some of this. And I don't know that you can retcon the ultimate results, but you need to give more texture. And while you might not be able to go back and add interstitial stories, you could have flashbacks or just lots of exposition that makes it feel better. And so I'm not totally aghast by this idea of going back to the well and doing a sequel, because I think it might be necessary to clean some of this shit up and give them a way out of some of this stuff as well. So I'm kind of intrigued by it, especially because obviously they get all the people back. And we know, I mean, these actors aren't that much older, and I'm sure that most of them, not all of them, would be thrilled to go back and do more Game of Thrones. So I don't think there's going to be any other problem other than having the creative fortitude to see it through and make it right. Because a lot of people asked us too, Dave, like, how would we have changed everything? And it's like, I wouldn't have changed anything. This is so, ultimately, it's so complicated and so above my understanding as a creator and a fiction writer and all of the rest of it. It's like, I don't even deign to tell you how to rewrite this thing. But I will say that I think we need more, and I think they can clean it up in a sequel. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, we all know you have these beloved things. We love Game of Thrones. We love these characters. It's so dangerous to want for something, but I am really pleased that they're going to continue it, because I do think it gives us some opportunities to see, not only revisit this world that we love and this main character who we really care about in Jon Snow, but there's a lot of people, as you said earlier, Kyle, who survive. You know, we're almost certainly going to see Sansa. We would almost certainly see Tormund, Tyrion. Jon Snow and Tyrion have that great friendship. See Peter Dinklage return as Tyrion would be an amazing opportunity. And these other players, you know, we have Bronn, we have Samwell, we have Yara, we have Davos, we have all these wonderful characters we could just go back to. I am excited. I'm excited, but you know, I get excited for things like Obi-Wan Kenobi too, and then I'm ultimately let down. And just no spoilers for Obi-Wan whatsoever. I was really nonplussed with it. It wasn't that it was terrible. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't wonderful. It was just kind of fell flat somewhere in the middle, where it kind of leaves you with that feeling of why even bother? You only get one shot at this. You only get one shot at this connective tissue between these two already established parts of Star Wars. So let's really like bear down and like make this amazing. I know it's kind of time is of the essence, especially because Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen are both in that wheelhouse age-wise. But you know what I mean? It's like, really, let's make the time to make this thing great. And sometimes things just catch magic and it's lightning in a bottle and it's great in spite of itself. But why not bear down and just really make the effort to make it wonderful? So that's what I'm really hoping they do with this. Less so with the House of the Dragon prequel, but more so with the Snow sequel, where it's like, we're really invested in these characters. And a lot of people are not pleased with how it ended, which the more we converse about it seems silly. But, now we have a chance to really revisit this world in a really memorable way. So let's go for it.
Is there anything else you want to add, Dave, before we wrap it up?
I have one wild take. Something that I was bothering me for a while, and then I realized, you know what, this is really a problem for me. And that's riding on the dragons. I don't like it. I don't like riding on the backs of the dragons.
Yeah, I don't either. I dig it.
There's something cheesy about it.
Totally.
Right?
Well, especially John being able to ride makes no sense. Like, these are unbelievable things. Like, air travel is not even a thing in their world, so it's not like you can imagine. It's just insanity. I don't hate the idea of the Dragon Queen riding her dragons, but it should be like her. That's like what she does or whatever.
Sure,
at the very most, because it is cool. She's got a little. To her credit, she's got a little bit of a George Washington going on. She does fight. Some leaders don't fight. She definitely does. It's a lot like Stannis. Like, they fight.
Yes.
And so to her credit, she does stand.
That's well said. Yeah. That and at much danger, which they plead with her not to do, because if she's taken out, all is lost. And that doesn't stop her from going out. So I do agree with you on that. I like that part. John riding the dragon, I could see them saying, like, that's his Targaryen blood. That's his secret Targaryen blood. Only he could do that because he's part Targaryen. There's something really interesting about the character of Jon Snow, too, and seeing more of him, because he has that Targaryen blood, but it's tempered with the Stark blood. So he's probably not going to be saddled with that propensity for madness, right? Because he's got that Stark in there to sort of calm that side down. So I do like the character of Jon Snow after we find out who he really is, and now seeing him in action as that half Targaryen, half Stark leader would be really cool. But the dragon thing, I'm just thinking, we come up in this world of like really cool 80s and 90s Dungeons and Dragons, Final Fantasy, really Lord of the Rings, really great fantasy, right? And we love the things of the characters who could summon monsters and stuff. I'd rather see it something like that, or where there's maybe some sort of psychokinetic mind energy between the dragon master and the dragon, where she's kind of wielding it like a weapon from the ground. Maybe she's on horseback. Maybe she's behind enemy lines or whatever. Maybe she doesn't even have to be there. Maybe it's just some sort of psychokinetic.
Like Bran has the warg
connection
thing. It
right,
could be
exactly.
With the dragon. Yeah.
Oh, I like that. Straight up warg.
Maybe that's just the only creature she can get inside is the dragon.
Oh.
But I agree with you. I don't think it necessarily looks very good either. The compositing is really bad in some of those shots. I think that I think I said this in the last episode, they introduced these elements where they could have had some practical Jurassic Park-like effect with some, like the dragon head petting it and dealing with it. And
sure.
I think that it was kind of a wasted thing. Although I do say when the Iron Fleet kills that second dragon, it's pretty brutal to watch. Like, it gets it in its chest and it looks down, and then it just goes right through its like head or its neck. And I'm like, oh my God, dude.
That was insane.
You feel sad for like their animals. They're pretty vicious animals too. But and Drogon is still alive, so he destroys the Iron Throne.
See him come back?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I like how they mentioned like, where is he, and like no one has seen him or whatever. So there is potential. Like, I think that they're playing around with this, understanding that they need to go back and fix some of this, and I think that they'll be able to do it with a sequel.
I think they could.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. And I just lastly, Kyle, I have to give a shout out to the moment where Drogon is the one to melt the Iron Throne, right? All these humans, the one with the wisdom is this unruly creature who has the intelligence to actually get rid of this symbol. I love the fact in those last moments it plays up the intelligence of the dragons, because you're like, oh, I didn't know they were capable of that sort of thinking. They know who people are and alliances, and they know who to protect it, but you don't know it's like that. So that kind of raises the bar for a dragon going out which I thought was a really cool moment. I mean, it's really one of my favorite moments in the show because you think Jon is fucked. You know, he basically kills Dany, right? He murders her after the kiss, and you hear Drogon coming up, and you're like, oh, fuck, he's fucked. Like, he's totally dead. And here's this dragon. He sort of has to stand off with Jon that just melts the Iron Throne and flies away with Dany. Really good shit. That, I gotta give a nod.
He understood that it was necessary, I think, in fact. I mean, because we don't really know what Drogon's perspective is, but he lost both of his brothers. He's the last dragon now. And so he saw that this madness cost them, you know, he probably cared about them or something, you know, and
yeah, it's enough. This is enough now.
Right.
I'm ending this. This is no longer a thing. So that was cool. And that, you know, that was a moment that I really remembered. It was funny how much I didn't remember going into this. It was like watching it new for the first time. Again, only seeing it once, the season 8 specifically. But it was so, you know, I come away really not minding the ending too much. Jon going to the wall, fine. Dany dead, fine. The people who lived, I'm totally fine with. You know, again, it would have been cool to see Jaime survive only so you could see that character because you're wanting to see that character become good, but it's good to leave it there. That's good writing. You know what I mean? Let him be beholden to his doom, you know? So I'm not unhappy. It's just the Bran character. That's kind of been that's been something you and I have been dealing with for this whole ride, and a lot of people have, and we're going to be forced to deal with them now in the snow. We're going to see him, right? Totally. We're going to see him. We have to see him. So he's coming back. But otherwise, it's amazing. I mean, I'm not retconning season 8, but it's really not even half as bad as people remember. It's really not.
No, it's, you know I agree with you. I think that, again, it's the compliment being paid to it that it is in no way as good as the way it began or was in the middle.
No,
it's just no way. And that is a flaw worth noting. I mean, it sucks. And yeah. So I don't know. I think on its own, it's fine. I think it's watchable. I enjoyed it, but your expectations are through the roof by this point in the show. And in my opinion, they're not met. But
that's a great way of putting it. Yeah. It deserved better. It's not bad, but it did deserve better when you look at it. What it could have been, its trajectory over the seasons. And it is one of those shows that just got incrementally worse as it went, which is not a rhythm you want to develop. It's not a cadence you want in the show. Can't think of another show like that, really, where it just definitely decisively got worse pretty much every season. But yeah, hey, man, we did it.
We did. We're done.
We're done.
We're done.
1 through 8.
I was just looking at all the episodes. I think the shortest one is about 2 hours even. So I think the longest one is 2 hours and 45 minutes. So yeah, we've got about 18, 19 hours, something like that on Game of Thrones. Wow. So there's a lot of content for you guys to enjoy if you'd like.
Not bad.
Thank you guys for being here with us and patiently waiting for these episodes to be done. If you're not, so if you're not into Game of Thrones, you're obviously looking at this as opportunity costs. So we understand. We're going to give it a little bit of a rest with TV for a couple months, but we'll be back with more TV episodes in August. I think we're going to begin again with a new show. One. And in the meantime, we'll obviously fill in all the different gaps we have developed with games and movies and all the rest over time. So thank you for your love, kindness, and support. Appreciate you, Dig. Let's end with a dad joke as we always do.
Let's do it, my friend. Kyle. Did you hear about the claustrophobic astronaut? He just wanted a bit more space.
Oh,
astronauts.
That was all right. I have a shirt with an astronaut on it that says I need more space. So
you do?
Yeah, I feel like we've been there before. We've done that.
We've been down that road.
Yeah, no doubt. But good try. Nonetheless. Well, Dave, thank you for your time. Appreciate you.
Thank you. It was fun.
It was fun. And thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of all things KnockBack and Last Stand Media. If you listen to us on free feeds, please do leave us a review on iTunes or elsewhere. You can follow us on YouTube if you want to watch the video like some of you do. And of course, get early ad-free access to every episode. Submit your questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas. Vote on topic ideas. Submit your topic ideas and the rest at patreon.com/laststandmedia. We'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.
What is dead may never die.
Yeah. KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty.
KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.